Hey guys, so today we're going to go over a review on linear functions. Just remember there are three ways to write a linear function. The most popular way is the slope-intercept form because you are given the slope, which is m, and the y-intercept, which is b. Now keep in mind for any equation, including linear, x and y represent any point on the graph, so we keep them as variables. For standard form, that means that x and y are on the same side of the equal sign where the constant is on the other side by itself. Not that you'll use standard form as much, but a should always be positive and a whole number. And finally, point slope form means that you're given a point, x sub 1 and y sub 1, and you're given a slope, so you can write it in point slope form. If you write it in point slope form or in standard form, remember you can always just get y by itself and write it as slope-intercept form. So these are all interchangeable. Now, when working with a system of linear equations, if the two lines intersect, there is one solution at the point of intersection. If the two lines are parallel, they don't intersect, so there's no solution. And algebraically, you can tell by looking at the slopes. If the two linear functions have the same slope, then that means that there's no solution, the lines are parallel. And if they happen to have the same slopes in the y-intercept, that means they coincide and there's infinitely many solutions. So keeping that all in mind, we're going to work with a function here, given the graph of f of x. Yes, I know the graph looks a little funny. And the linear function 6x minus 3y equals 9. What is the point of intersection? So first off, given the graph of f of x, I'm first going to find out what f of x is. So I can find the slope in the y-intercept given a graph. So f of x, I'm going to write it as y equals mx plus b, where I just need to find the slope and the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is the point on the y-axis. That would be at -1 if you can't see it. So just moving this down here, I'm going to change the b or the y-intercept to -1. And the slope means how do I go from one point to the other? So I would go up 2 over 1. I can do that again as well, up 2 over 1. So the slope is rise over run. You're going up 2 and over 1. You don't have to put the over 1. And then everything else drops down. The y equals, and then the x comes down. And this is what f of x equals to. Y equals 2x minus 1. So this is in slope-intercept form, mx plus b form. So since I'm given the other linear function in standard form, what I'm going to do is I'm going to also just get y by itself so that it is in slope-intercept form, and I'll be able to tell the slope because the slope is always the number with x. So from here, I'm going to subtract 6x onto both sides, and I'll get -3y equals, these two are not like terms, so I'm going to bring them down. One has an x, one does not. So you can't add or subtract terms that aren't like terms. And then from here, the last step to getting y by itself is I'm going to divide by -3. And I would put the whole thing over -3, but since I'm actually using these values, I'm just going to divide each term by -3, which is the same thing. And from here, I'll get y equals -6 divided by -3 is 2x, and then 9 divided by -3 gives me -3. So if I look at the two slopes here, y equals mx plus b as well, the slope for this line is 2, and the slope for the other line from the graph is also 2. So that means since they have the same slope, the lines are parallel. And if the lines are parallel, that means there are no points of intersection. I'm going to go a little bit down here, but so that is the answer for the first part. Now, moving on, these two problems are, together. Moving on from here, a function, which I'm going to call h of x, is determined by the equation y equals 2 over 7x squared. Prove algebraically how many solutions exist between f of x, remember f of x is right here. This was the graph, so this is the function f of x, and h of x. So the two that I'm going to work with are h of x, which is given as y equals 2 over 7 x squared, and f of x, which was given up here as y equals 2x minus 1. Now, if I'm going to solve and y is already by itself, I probably would look to use substitution as my algebraic method. You could use elimination or you could use substitution. If the variable is by itself, it's just easier to use substitution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite the first equation. But instead of y, I'm going to replace it with 2 over 7x squared, because if I look at the second function, it tells me what y equals to. Y equals 2 over 7x squared. So I'm going to replace this y with 2 over 7x squared and write the rest of the first function down equals 2x minus 1. So this is how I'm going to solve for x. Now, it is quadratic because x to the second power. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make one side equal to 0. Something about quadratic equations is you always want the coefficient of x squared to be positive. So I'm going to move everything to the left side of the equal sign because it is positive on that side already. So I want to keep it positive. So I'm just going to do 2 steps in one. I'm going to move the 2x by subtracting 2x, and I'm going to move the minus 1 by adding 1. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. None of these are like terms on the left. One has x squared, one has x, one doesn't have anything at all. So I'm going to bring all three of these terms down, and the other side equals 0. Now, not only do I want a, the coefficient of x squared, because remember in a quadratic it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So not only do I want the coefficient of x squared a to be positive, I also want it to be a whole number. And in order for it to be a whole number, I can just get rid of it by multiplying it by its denominator. The only thing that makes this a fraction is it's being divided by 7. So I'm going to get rid of it by multiplying by 7. But I can't just randomly multiply by 7 without keeping it balanced because it's math. So I'm going to multiply everything, including that other side of the equal sign, even though it is 0, by 7. So make sure you copy this down. We're moving to the next page. And from here, if I multiply everything by 7, I will get 2x squared minus 14x plus 7 equals 0. Now, this is a quadratic equation. You could factor, but since, in all honesty, I made up this problem, there are no two numbers that multiply to be first times last, which is 14, and also adds up to be the middle number, which is negative 14. So while your questions will probably be solved by factoring, you could always also use quadratic formulas. So I'm just going to put a little spin on things since I can't factor it, and I'm going to use quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember, you can solve a quadratic equation, meaning solve for x using factoring, quadratic formula, or completing the square. Usually you guys don't prefer completing the square, so this is just the other option as well. A is 2, b is negative 14, c is 7. So I'm going to replace everything. I'm going to also take a sidebar to write down what everything equals to. A, B, and C are just numbers. So if you plan to use the quadratic formula, make sure that you don't bring the x with it. So negative, negative b. Negative, and I'm saying negative b because b is negative 14. So if I write negative and then negative 14, it'll give me positive 14. Plus or minus the square root of negative 14 squared minus 4 times 2 times 7 all over 2 times a, which is 2 times 2. Usually when I use quadratic formula, I just like to focus on the square root first, meaning everything else just comes right down. So inside of the square root, I have 14 sorry, negative 14 squared, but remember, put it in parentheses because when you square a negative, it should always be positive, 196. I always drop down the minus sign and then just multiply 4 times 2 times 7. And that would give me 140. Wait, ahead of myself a little bit, 56, and then that would give me 140. So inside of the square root will be 140. Everything else will just be brought over. So my two answers are going to be, and mind you, because I can't factor this, this will be a decimal value, so just keep that in mind. One will be plus, so I'm going to take 14 plus the square root of 140 and write in the calculator, sorry, type in the calculator equals, get that decimal, and then divide it by 4. And it should give me approximately 6.46. And then the other one would be 14 minus the square root of 140. Make sure you press equals after that. And then dividing it by 4 would give you approximately 0.54. But again, most likely since your problems weren't made up, they'll work out factoring. But in case you want to use quadratic formula, there it is as well. All right, guys, I hope this helps.